Okay, so reminders. Quiz 4 is going to be due Thursday, end of the day. Quiz 5 will open at the beginning of the day on Thursday. I suggest you try to do quiz 5 before you do the midterm. It'll help you to go over the material. The midterm is going to open at 2 p.m. on Thursday, and then it will close end of day on Friday. We do not have class on Thursday. So you have that time to take the midterm if you want to. The instructions on the midterm tell you the length of time. I believe it's set up as an hour, 20 minutes. It's one go, it's timed. So once you hit that time limit, it's going to automatically submit it. If you have one of those accommodation letters, I have already incorporated the extra time. If you want to double check that you think you should have one, you can email me and I'll tell you if you're one of the people I got one for. So again, no class on Thursday. If you want to come in here and take it, feel free. I won't be here. So to prepare for the midterm, we will have some questions from lab type stuff on there. So look over your labs, your quizzes, stuff from lecture. The midterm stops just before fossils and past life. So what we're doing today and a lot of what we did on Thursday will be on the next midterm. I was going to start moving everything over. The last time I taught this, the midterm happened a little bit earlier, but it turns out there's quite a bit of stuff on dating on the midterm, the next midterm, and you do that during week 7 in lab. So I decided to leave that where it was because you will understand it better after you do it in lab. And this week there are going to be 2 participations. One is a simple 1-question survey. It's actually a quiz, but it's not a graded quiz. It's just asking, when did you take the midterm? And that's, again, participation. So it's just submit an answer. I don't care what the answer is. And then the second one is a mnemonic on the geologic timescale. So when you do this second participation, please tell me what parts of the timescale you're making a mnemonic for. The timescale is extremely complex. They have many different breakdowns. We're going to go through it and see just how many different breakdowns we have, different levels, different regions sometimes have different names for things. So last class I mentioned that in the US, we talk about the Mississippian and the Pennsylvanian. Everyone else calls it the Carboniferous. So, when you do this, please tell me what your mnemonic is representing. And I will go over, that slide's going to show up at the end of the presentation as well. So last week, we started getting into the Mesozoic. We ended with that funny video on, at least I think it's funny, on, what is a Jurassic Park. So the Mesozoic is, during this time period, this is when we're getting Pangea. We're having the supercontinent. All of our land masses are together. So we have mass migrations of organisms across those land masses. This is the time period when we're seeing dinosaurs. They're appearing in the late Triassic. And we're seeing a lot of diversification of species throughout this time period. Mammals are coming about, but they're very small in size and also in numbers. There aren't a lot of mammal species. We will see that after this time period, they will greatly diversify. During the Mesozoic, the mammals are very much low on the food chain. We are also going to see flying reptiles that will eventually, birds will come out of those flying reptiles. So in the Mesozoic, we had a lot of life in the sea. So finally, trilobites go extinct. Trilobites have been around for a long time. This is the time period where they do go extinct. We have lots of mollusks. We also have some ammonoids. They're a good index fossil. We have some squid-like relatives, sea urchins. So we have a great diversity of life in the seas during this time period. Lots of fossils, lots of limestones coming out of the shallow marine environment. At the end of the Triassic, we had one of these extinction events. So this was due to a magmatic province. So remember way back when we were talking about the different types of volcanic eruptions, and I said that we don't have any examples of flood basalts of the large igneous provinces currently happening. Good thing, because they lead to mass extinctions. So there's evidence in the rock record as well as in fossils that there was a change in the atmospheric conditions. So the idea is that this massive outpouring of magma led to changes in the atmospheric conditions, which led to climate change, which then killed off a lot of species. So during this time period, we start getting dinosaurs. So dinosaurs are throughout the Mesozoic era. And we actually have a class here that's called Dinosaurs and Their World. It's GEO101. If you are interested in dinosaurs, I suggest you take that class. This is all I'm going to tell you about dinosaurs, basically. They are occurring during this time. They are very diverse. They are various sizes. I'm not a paleontologist. Part of the reason we could have these massive land animals and sea animals is that we actually had massive flora. So here we have a fossilized leaf, and then we have a modern equivalent. So we had very large plants during this time, and we're starting to have flowering plants. That's what angiosperm is. So these massive plants were able to support the massive fauna, the large dinosaurs that were occurring in this time period. The end of the Cretaceous the Cretaceous is the end of the Mesozoic period. So it went Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous. We're actually starting to get our landforms. Remember 2 slides ago, I said that, during the Triassic, we had Pangea. Now they're starting to break apart. So we're starting to get our landforms. They're heading towards the modern locations. So things are splitting apart, and we're starting to get to somewhat recognizable land masses. And the end of the Cretaceous is everything's bad, everything's terrible. There's very strong evidence that the Cretaceous ended by a catastrophic impact of a meteorite that was about 13 kilometers across. That's big. The impact created a huge crater. We have identified the most likely crater. I'll show that in a couple slides. And that impact would have created a tsunami 2 kilometers high. It happened in the ocean. And it's going to, set massive fires. There's going to be the tsunami, which is going to cause all kinds of problems. We'll learn more about tsunamis later. And ultimately, this impact threw so much debris into the air. Debris, you have pulverized minerals that are, hazardous. And all of this debris is going to block out the solar radiation. And so that's going to actually shut down photosynthesis. So this massive impact basically shut everything down. And then we had mass extinction. So this is graphs showing the number of genera and then extinction for various time periods. So when you have low numbers of genera and high percentage of extinction, that's one of these mass extinction events. And the Cretaceous, the next period, it used to be called the Tertiary. So you may have heard the term KT. K is the abbreviation for Cretaceous. T would have stood for Tertiary. Now we call it the Paleogene, so now it's called the KPG. So KT, KPG, same thing. But this time period is characterized by almost instantaneous change in the fossil assemblages. We can actually identify this in the rock record. We can point to this boundary because of this massive event. So we have, mass extinction of most species on Earth, dinosaurs gone. So they had been ruling the planet for 150 million years. They're just gone. 90% of the plankton and 75% of plant species gone. And so this boundary, we actually see this in the rock record. We can go find it across the globe. And so we can see this instantaneous die-off of species. There are a few really well-preserved sites. There's also some contentious debate about some sites. Again, not the worst mass die-off. That was this one, from the Permian to the Triassic. So we can see that, well, the arrow is kind of covering it, but this was the worst one. True or false? In a mass extinction event, all species go extinct. So true? False? Very good. If everything went extinct, we wouldn't be here, right? If life was completely obliterated, the planet would just not keep going. So the end of the Cretaceous, we are seeing this mass extinction. So everything gone? No. Most things gone? Yes. So here is an image of this boundary, the KPG or KT. This is up in Canada. So we can actually go point to it in the rock record. So dinosaurs, ammonoids, mosasaurs, most marine reptiles, all gone. We have severe reduction in our plants. And plankton, the oceans really had drastic die-off. So this is thought to be caused by this meteor impact. So we actually see an anomaly in the geochemistry at this boundary that indicates we had this massive impact. We can actually find droplets of cooled molten rock that indicate there was a massive shock event. We're seeing that here. This is shocked quartz. So this indicates that there was very high pressure and high temperature for a short period of time. This occurred, I'm sorry, I do not speak other languages well. I'm going to butcher this. Chicxulub, I think is how it's pronounced. It's off the Yucatan Peninsula. So it is off in the ocean basin. It's not on land. We can image it. This is a gravity image. So we can actually see this impact crater preserved in the ocean basin. So this is the one that's most likely to have been the impact crater that led to this die-off. The crater is 100 kilometers wide, and we can see it very easily in these surveys. And we can actually see it somewhat on the surface due to changes in drainage and then vegetation. Radiometric dating has indicated this happened at 65 million years ago, which fits perfectly with this end of the Cretaceous mass extinction event. So there's pretty strong evidence this is the spot that it happened. All right, so Mesozoic over. Let's move into the Cenozoic. Now mammals have a chance to become the primary or the ruling life on the planet. You know, the dinosaurs are gone. There's this big gap. So something needs to fill in that gap, and it's going to be mammals. So the Paleogene was a very, the early Paleogene was a very different looking world. Here are a couple of illustrations of some of these species. We had different plants, different fauna as well. So mammals started to take the place that all the dinosaurs had been holding. So the dinosaurs are gone. So the mammals are now going to fill in those niches. So during the Jurassic and Cretaceous, during the Mesozoic, when the dinosaurs were the dominant species on the planet, we had very few, not very diversified mammals. Now that they're gone at the end of the Cretaceous, the mammals suddenly start spreading out. They start becoming more diverse. They start taking up more of those ecological niches that had been held by dinosaurs. And it keeps going throughout this entire period. It's not just the mammals, though. Other species start diversifying. So flowering plants, angiosperms, they're now going to become dominant. So grasses as a plant type start to appear during this time period. So this is going to allow for mass grazing. So true or false, grass is just the plant that grows in someone's backyard. So true, false, good. So grass is actually a type of plant. So there are many different types of grasses, and I'm not going to go into it, but it's the way that they photosynthesize is different than some other plants, and that's how they're all related. But they're very important for the food system. So during the Paleogene, we had mammals. They looked some were relatives of modern mammals, but they looked quite a bit different. So here are a few examples. This is a Paleogene horse. I'll admit, I was one of those people that was like, obsessed with horses when I was a kid. So I studied them a lot. They actually had multiple toes instead of now a single hoof. They were much smaller. They were about the size of a dog. We had many different types of elephants, which oddly enough was another animal I loved as being a child. So we had elephants with multiple tusks. They were much more spread out than just Africa and Asia. So we had some smaller ones, we had some larger ones, and then we got two really big ones. We also had different types of birds. So this is an example of a large flightless bird that's eating one of those horses. So we had a very diverse mammal, and birds aren't mammals, so non-mammal populations as well. So all those positions that had been held by dinosaurs for 150 million years, new animals are starting to evolve to take those places. So another true or false, horses and their relatives have remained in North America since their ancestors first appeared. So their ancestors were those little three-toed things. So true, false, cool. So yeah, this is false. So we had horses in North America and elephants as well, and tigers and many species that their relatives now live across the globe, and they died off. And horses only came back to North America when North America was explored by Europeans just a few centuries ago. So, they have not remained here. So the Eocene, which was the beginning of the Paleogene, it was very warm. So it's very similar to a modern climate. At the end of this time period, that changes. So we start to get glaciation, it starts getting cold. So we started to have Australia split off from Antarctica during this time period. They used to be together. So they have very similar rock units. And so when that happened, we started to establish the cold circumpolar current. So this is a current of water that brings, that regulates the temperature of the planet and brings cold water north, and then brings northern waters to the pole to cool off. This is also when the ice sheets in Antarctica start forming. So East Antarctica has a very old ice sheet. It's starting to form during this time. So we started going into an ice age in the Oligocene. And ice age led to different types of fauna. So we're going to start at this, then start moving into the modern world. Again, I'm not going to go through every single little bit. I'm trying to do this fairly fast. So the Neogene, Neo being new, world, we're having megafauna. So we have a colder climate, which leads to animals getting bigger. So this is where we're getting things like woolly mammoths. We have the massive bison. The bears are bigger. Everything's bigger during this time period. And then when the ice age ends, these massive fauna can't survive, so they'll die off. Also during this time, we have the appearance of monkeys. So monkeys, they have an interesting monkeys and other primates, they have an interesting trait, and that's that they have a larger brain cavity than their size would suggest. So their brain is unusually large compared to animals of other sizes. So I'm not going to try to pronounce this particular primate's name, but this is an important development for our development. So our ancestors were Australopithecus. They developed 4 million years ago. So that's in this time frame. This is where we're starting to get these larger brain cavities, which leads to the ability to have higher levels of thinking. I'm not sure which one. They don't have Homo habilis on here. So I'm not sure which one was the first to start using tools. But so, our prior ancestors, we're talking a couple million years ago. The Homo genus, which is our family, appeared 2.4 million years ago. So that's around here. So all of this is happening in the Neogene. So 4 million years ago, down here, this is in the Pliocene. 2 million years ago, that's the Pleistocene. Homo sapiens, which is our species, 300,000 years ago is when it appears in the Holocene. The Holocene is the most modern epoch. I'm sorry, 300,000 years ago is when Homo sapiens appeared. The Holocene, which is the modern epoch, started about 12,000 years ago. So we as a species are very young, extremely young, compared to other species. And this is our evolution. So, bit of a wrap up from last time as well. So the oceans start to appear within 150 million years of the formation of the Earth. And then we start getting life within 600 million years. It's very simple life, but we have life. We had this oxygen producing bacteria that appeared about 2.3 billion years ago. That led to the Great Oxidation Event, which led to the diversification of life. Stromatolites are the dominant life form for about 3 billion years, between 3.5 billion years ago and the Cambrian. With the Cambrian, we had mass explosion of life. We had an end of Permian mass extinction. It was the largest on record, most likely caused by volcanoes. We had a mass extinction at the end of the Cretaceous, most likely caused by a massive impact. So the Mesozoic, that's the age of dinosaurs. That was the mass impact led to their extinction. The Paleogene is when we see mammals become dominant, and we also see grasses become dominant in the plant world. And this is also when we're starting to see a modern arrangement of continents. All right, next thing. Let's talk about dating, geologic dating in deep time. So there are different ways to date things. The first one we're going to talk about is relative dating. So what is relative dating? So is it giving an exact age to an item? Giving a range of ages to an item? Or putting an item in age order with other items? Okay, great. So yeah, it's this last one. So relative dating is this idea of we are going to put things in an order. We don't necessarily know what exact time those things happen. We can put them in an order. So this goes again back to our friend James Hutton, the father of modern geology, with his idea of uniformitarianism, that we find no vestige of a beginning, no prospect of an end. So this idea that we have cycles. So at the time that Hutton was living, people thought the earth was young. They were trying to fit it with the Bible, at least in the Western world. And so they had this idea that everything happened in a catastrophic way. You had these catastrophic events. Things were happening very quickly. But Hutton went around, he was in Great Britain. He went around Scotland. Scotland has amazing geology, by the way. And he saw this particular point, Sicker Point. And he's looking at it and trying to figure out why it's happening the way that it's happening. And so he's seeing these two sets of beds. It might be easier to see in the drawing, but he has a set of beds here and then another set of beds, and they're perpendicular to each other. And so he saw that and started thinking about it, and he started to realize that Earth's processes, they're all cycles. So we have a rock cycle with erosion, deposition, lithification, and then we have uplift, which leads to more erosion, and so on and so forth. And so he had the idea that, everything is happening actually slowly. That it's happening within these cycles. And that what we're seeing now is, what we're seeing in the rock record is the preservation of the same processes we see actively shaping our planet. So we see a river running through a valley. That's making the next rock record. So this idea that everything's happening slowly and in a cycle. And so he realized, because of this, that the Earth had to be old. It couldn't be as young as the Bible tells us. And so this is where the idea of deep time comes from, that we have this long geologic time. It's not just a couple thousand years. So we can do time in two different ways in geology. We can do relative time, which again is the order of things. So it's just putting things in order. Or we can give absolute dating, which is a numerical time. So this is what is the actual age. The way we do that is with radiometric dating typically, at least in geology. In, say, archaeology, anthropology, they have other ways of doing this, like they will use tree rings as well. Geology, deep time, much too old to do anything like that. So here's two examples where you can have just putting things in order, or you can have the actual date. This is basically looking at flight. So, you can put the milestones of human flight in order, or you can give the actual date that they occurred. We do the same thing with rocks. So again, we have a bunch of principles. One of them is that uniformitarianism, that what we're observing today is going to be preserved in the rock record as a solid rock. So the mud that we see drying out and cracking, that can be preserved as mud cracks and rock. The deposition of sediment on a beach will be preserved as sandstone in the rock. All right, this one is a logical question to then lead into the first principle that I'm going to talk about. So if I'm placing a group of books on a table in alphabetical order, so I put A first, then B, etc., which one of these would be the oldest event? So would it be A, B, C, or they're all the same age? Okay, I did see people raising their hand. So yeah, this is the idea of superposition. It's actually the second one on here. So superposition is the idea that in an undeformed sequence, undeformed is important there, the oldest rocks are going to be on the bottom. The thing on the bottom had to go down first, right? Another principle is original horizontality. So this is the idea that when you lay down sediment, it's going to spread out in a horizontal fashion. It's going to want to lay down parallel to the surface it's falling on, and it's going to spread out. The idea of that's important because that means if we see things that aren't horizontal, that means something's happened to them. So if we see tilted beds, that means they've been deformed. Something's happened since they were deposited, because sand does not want to lay down at a 45-degree angle. Now, remember we talked about cross beds? The beds between those cross beds, those are horizontal. Cross beds themselves are not. So we're talking about the overall bed. Lateral continuity. So this is the idea that when you lay out that sediment, it's going to spread out as far as it can. So it's going to spread out horizontally as far as there's enough sediment to do so in a sheet. Erosion may interrupt this. So if we see beds on one side of a canyon and see the same beds on the opposite side of the canyon, the most logical explanation is there used to be that bed all the way across, and the middle bit has been eroded away. So our sediment's not going to deposit a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there. The idea is that all of that would have been connected when it was initially deposited. So when we look at, for example, beds that are separated by oceans, originally they would have been together. Now it's not the idea that the ocean has eroded away. At that point, the plates have moved away. But if you're looking at something like a river valley, then yeah, the river has just removed material. Cross-cutting relations. I believe I mentioned this one at some point earlier on. So this is the idea that if you have one feature cutting across another feature, the younger feature is the one that's cutting. So if you have a dike cutting across beds, that dike has to be younger than the beds. So this is for things like faults, dikes, erosion, intrusions. They can't cut across something that doesn't exist. So that means they have to be younger than what they're cutting across. Intrusion. So this is baked contacts. So when you have an intrusion of igneous rocks, a lot of times they'll actually bake or metamorphose the rock they're touching. And so that means that the intrusion has to be younger than the material that it has intruded to. So this ends up being important because sometimes you have igneous material that then has sedimentary material deposited on top of it or around it. Sometimes the igneous material comes in later. The way you can tell the order is, does this happen? Do you have this material baking the surrounding material? So if the igneous material comes in later, it's hot, it's molten, it's going to bake or metamorphose the material it touches. If it went the other direction, you wouldn't see this. So when you see that baked contact, that means the igneous material is younger. Inclusion. So this is the idea that if you have fragments of something, then the fragments are older than whatever they're in. So if you have fragments of a rock inside another bed, those fragments have to be older than the bed they're in. They're not just going to appear inside. If you have a sill here of igneous material, you're not going to have random bits of that sill appear inside a sandstone, if the sill came in later. This is helpful for figuring out things like sills. If you see inclusions of that sill in the rock above it, well, that means that the sill is older than the rock that has the inclusions. So the inclusions have to be older than the enclosing material. These are all logical things. So we use these to figure out the relative ages of things. So it allows us to put things in the order of events. So this includes depositions, intrusions, faulting, folding, erosions, etc. So this block diagram, same one I just showed you. In this image, which one of these is the most recent event? The deposition of layers, the dike intrusion, okay, the faulting, the folding is this bending, or the sill intrusion, and the sill is this guy there. Okay, so I did see a couple people that raised their hand for the dike. So the dike is cutting across the fault here. So that means that dike has to be younger. It's cutting across basically everything. The sill gets cut by the fault. So the sill is quite a bit older. And then the layers, everything's done to the layers. The folds are also cut by this fault. So the way that you do this is you go either from the youngest to the oldest or the oldest to the youngest. And sometimes you actually go back and forth. Depends on how complicated this is. So on this one, I probably would start with the youngest. So the youngest would be potentially some sort of erosion. So you have some erosion occurring there. This dike is younger than any of the other things. So it's cutting across the fault, it's cutting across the folds, all of the beds. The dike is the youngest. The next youngest thing would be this fault. So the fault is cutting across this pluton. It's cutting across the folding and then all the beds. Then the next youngest thing would actually be this intrusion. So this intrusion, it's baking all of these, we have this halo. So we can see that this intrusion is younger than all of it's younger than all the beds. It's also younger than the folding. So we see that if we undo this fault, we would see that this intrusion would actually, the baked contact would be continuous. The next would be the folding. So all of these beds were folded together. And then the sedimentary beds would be the oldest. You can actually go through the sedimentary beds and figure out their order. When you do that, you need to take into account things like the inclusions. So we can see that this contact has number 5. Number 5's up there. That also tells us that this intrusion had to happen after 5 was there because it's in here. We see inclusions in the sill. Oops, I did not put the sill in my order. So the sill comes after the folding, or right before the folding. Yeah, the sill would come right before the folding. So the sill is also happening after all this has been deposited. So the sill comes in right before it folds, but after the intrusion. So we have inclusions of both number 4 and number 5 in it. So that means it had to occur after those two were deposited. And then we could also, again, look for these baked contacts. We would look for baked contacts also on the sill. They're not actually showing that though. So that's how you go through it. You will do this in week 7 of lab. You will have to go through some block diagrams and figure out the orders. And it just takes, it's detective work. It's going through step by step what had to happen first, using all those principles I just went through. And the final one is fossil succession. So this is one where you can actually potentially get dates. So fossils are preserved in sedimentary rocks, and the fossils are only going to occur during certain times. So the fossils are only going to be preserved in rocks that were, were deposited during the time those fossils existed. Now, you have to make sure the fossil is primary. So you can have a fossil eroded out of an older rock and redeposited. So you have to, be careful that this is the first deposition of that fossil. But we can get relative ages. So the fossils also tell us about the past environment. So we can know more about the environmental conditions. And when we have a range of fossils occurring, we can actually get a time frame. So specific fossils are only found in certain time ranges. So if a fossil was only around for 2 million years, well, then you have a start and a stop time of the potential age of that bed. So these are, again, those index fossils. So they're diagnostic of a particular geologic time. And we can actually have overlap. So if this index fossil, for example, is only around for a short period of time, but it could be that it crosses over with a couple of other ones. So if you see those 3 or 4 fossils in your bed, that can really narrow down your time period. So some of these fossils exist for long periods of time, some of them for very short periods of time. So sometimes it's not just a single fossil, it's actually the assemblage of fossils. Now, I mentioned this for a couple of them, but it's important for all of them. These principles are assuming no disturbance has occurred. If you disturbed the beds, everything's off. So you can actually have what are known as overturned beds, where you can flip your beds upside down. So then you no longer have that law of superposition holding true if you flipped your beds upside down. We will learn about that when we talk about geologic structures. So, uniformitarianism. The present is the key to the past. Everything's a cycle. It's happening slowly. Fossils can help us figure out which rocks are older or younger than others, and sometimes give us an age bracket. And geometric principles that are telling us about the geology allow us to reconstruct the order of events. But what about the actual numbers? Real, absolute dating. So deep time, again, geologic time. The Earth is old. So the Earth, we've got a long history of the Earth, but we don't have the entire history of the Earth. And that is what we have things called unconformities. An unconformity is where we have a gap in the rock record. So this is a time period where we either aren't depositing material for some reason, or we're eroding away, we're removing material. And there are three types of unconformities. Unconformity is the general name that we have a gap in time. So we can have a non-conformity, which is this upper picture, an angular unconformity, this one, or a disconformity. Now I'm going to be a little bit mean and ask you to logic this one out. So what is the difference between a non-conformity, this upper picture, and this bottom picture, the disconformity? So is it that only non-conformities show a gap in time? That the non-conformity is a contact with a crystalline rock? Or there is no difference? Okay, that was actually really mean of me to do this before we kind of talked about this at all. The different symbols here represent different types of rocks. So where we have blocks, that tends to be limestone. Where we have dots, that tends to be sandstone. If they're random dashes, those are some sort of crystalline rock. So it's normally igneous rock. Solid, same thing. If we have little lines, that's going to be a mudstone. Solid lines is, again, also another mudstone. So the difference here is actually that nonconformity has crystalline rock in it, that a disconformity is sedimentary. So they look very similar to each other. The difference is nonconformity has to have that crystalline rock. So a nonconformity is where you have igneous or metamorphic rocks are capped by some sort of sedimentary rocks. So this could be that this is the basement, or it could be an intrusion. The important thing is just that you have crystalline rock with sedimentary rock over top of it. So this is normally due to erosion that's then followed by deposition. So you erode down to your crystalline basement, and then you deposit sedimentary rocks on top of it. An angular unconformity is the easiest one. So this is where they're just not parallel to each other. So that you have a difference in the actual, one set of beds is tilted, the other set isn't, or they're both tilted, just not tilted in the same way. So this is normally happening where you have horizontal sediments are then deformed in some way, so they're folded. Then you have erosion that removes the top of those. And then you have another layer of deposition so that you end up having these folded beds underlying horizontal beds. So you have a difference in the dip of the beds. So it's angular. So it's a distinct difference in the bedding planes on either side of the contact. And the final one is disconformity. These are hard to find. They're hard to recognize in the field because it's just a disruption in the sedimentation. So you just have a period of time where you're either not depositing or you're eroding away. So this is simply a gap in time. So we have one time period of deposition, then it could be that we had erosion occurring, and then we have renewed deposition at a later date. So we now have a gap in time. And these can be very hard to recognize. They can be very subtle. These are important because we will use these to make geologic maps. So geologic maps are, representations in 2D of the 3D world. So this is what we would see on a map. This is what it would look like in the real world. So it's important for geologists to be able to take this 2D dimension, or I'm sorry, this 2D image, and in your brain be able to realize what's happening in the subsurface. And understanding the relationship between these different unconformities allows us to do that. And we can actually recognize them by looking at these maps. All right, so absolute dating. Okay. So absolute dating is where we give an actual date and an actual time to events. We do this normally with radioactive decay of atoms in minerals. So this is where those isotopes, which are elements with varying amounts of neutrons, are important. So we can have stable isotopes, which just remain the same. They don't change. We can have radioactive isotopes. Those will decay away. And then we can have radiogenic isotopes, and those are the ones that are formed by decay. So they decay in a progressive chain. So they go from a unstable to eventually a stable endpoint. They may go through several steps to get there, but eventually they will get to a stable endpoint. We call the parent isotope the isotope that is starting the decay. So this is the one that's unstable. And then we call the daughter isotope is the product of the decay. So that's the endpoint that's stable. And these are families. We name the families based on the parent and the daughter. The daughter being the final endpoint. Sometimes it takes many steps to get to that daughter. The half-life is the time for half of the unstable parent to decay away to daughter. And that is going to be characteristic for each set of isotopes. And that property is what we're going to use to figure out the date. Because we can look at the ratios of parent and daughter, we know what their half-life is, and figure out how much time has passed. So this is how it happens. Hopefully you can see this. The colors are a little bit hard to see. So we start off with all parent. So we start off, for example, with 16 parent, 0 daughter. After 1 half-life, we will go down to 8 parent and 8 daughter. After 2 half-lives, we will take those 8 parents and divide it by 2 again. So we will go down to 4 parent and 12 daughter. Another half-life, those 4 parents gets divided in half again. So we go to 2 and 14. Another half-life, we now only have 1 parent and 15 daughters left. So with each half-life, you divide the number of parents by 2 again. So this is an exponential decay. So we have all parents, so we divide it by half. Now we're dividing that half by half again, by half again. And the next slide is actually this simulation, so you can see it. So in the simulation, which the next slide is this enlarged, it's gray for the parents. Oh no, I'm sorry, it's purple for the parent, and then it will become gray for the daughter. So we'll start off fully purple, and then with each progressive half-life, you lose purple and gain more gray. So it happens pretty fast. You can see it here, that we go from 0 daughter and 100% parent to 50-50, and then, it keeps going from there. So hopefully this will go through a couple times. So this is going to allow us to figure out times. How, we can look at what the ratio of parent to daughter is, and knowing that half-life, we can figure out how much time has passed since the birth of that mineral. They're different families, and they all have different half-lives. The half-life is unique to each set. So some of them have very long half-lives. So for example, some of these, trying to remember what SM is, goes to neodymium, 106 billion years. That's not going to be very useful because we haven't even gotten anywhere near one of those half-lives. 48 billion. Rubidium to strontium. Again, not as useful because that's, pretty long half-life. Of these, the one that's actually used, uranium to lead is used quite a bit. Again, it's for old things. Potassium to argon is very useful. So for one thing, potassium is a very common element. We have a lot of potassium. It's one of the really common elements. It's a heck of a lot more common than uranium is. It's one of those common crustal elements. So it's more common. It also has a better length of half-life. So we use that one a lot. Unfortunately, it goes to argon, which is a gas. So it's only useful if you can keep that argon present so you know how much daughter has been produced. And here's another lead or uranium lead. Uranium goes to a couple different types of lead, which is interesting because it's like the opposite of alchemy. Alchemy was the goal of turning lead into gold. Uranium is a useful product. It's an expensive product, and it turns into lead. I find that, SM is samarium. So some of these are more useful than others. Carbon-14 has a very short half-life, geologically speaking. It's not useful in geology very much because it's very short. It's very useful in anthropology because it's appropriate for anthropological events. Also, carbon is from organics, so not found so often in rocks, but again, very useful for anthropological events. It's the same idea, though. All right. So why might a parent-daughter system not be useful for aging a rock? So the elements aren't present in that rock. Too much parent has decayed to daughter. A full half-life hasn't occurred, or all of the above. Yeah, so all of the above. So if you don't have the elements, well, then it's not going to be useful at all. If we don't have enough parent to figure out, based on the daughter, how much was there, if it's all daughter, that's not going to help us at all either. And if we haven't had enough time to develop daughter, if it's all parent, that's not. So deep time, this geologic time. We call it that because it's a lot of time. 4.6 billion years. That's a long time. I wish I put in here a graphic showing the difference between million and billion. It is significant. So this, we talk about geologic time, it's a completely different frame of reference than talking about human history. So we're seeing things that happened a long time ago. So for example, we see fossils that are extinct fossils that are high up in mountains, and they are marine life. So we see shark teeth at the top of a mountain. That tells us that a lot of time has passed. So these processes all take a very long time. We're moving continents around. That takes a long, long time. So what is this time? The solar system, this is we get this from the absolute age of meteorites. It's about 4.6 billion years. The oldest zircon, which is a remnant element, we found it in sandstone, is only about 4.4 billion years. The oldest rocks are about 4 billion years. So we actually, we get the age of the Earth based on, the Earth formed with the solar system. But we don't have the entire Earth's history recorded. So we get this age for the Earth from meteorites and moon rocks. The solar system is younger than the entire universe. So the entire universe, the Big Bang, is about 14 billion years. So we have a young solar system. So let's look at this in another way. So that one should not be there. This is a calendar, 1 year. So we're going to start off with the Earth formed. The Earth formed on January 1. The first single-celled life is coming in March, so that's 3.9 billion years ago. Multicellular life is coming in 1 billion years ago, which is July. Hard parts So, when we're starting to have those like trilobites and, harder fossils, 540 million years ago, that's November. The first land plants are occurring in December, 440 million years ago. The dinosaurs, they're towards the end of December. So we're getting towards like the second and third week of December. So that's 230 million years ago. The end of the dinosaurs is in the last week of December. So that's about 66 million years ago. The Homo family doesn't show up until December 31st, towards the middle of the day to the end of the day. And then Homo sapiens is basically the last hour of December 31st. So this is what we mean by deep time, that we are, oldest known Oxford, yeah, that got off, sorry. Time is, 4.6 billion years is a lot longer than most people realize. It really is. And that's what we mean by geologic time, by deep time. So we split this into super eons, eons, eras, periods, and then epochs. So the super eons is where we're talking about like the Phanerozoic and then like Precambrian. Those are the eons. Eras are where we're talking about these Paleozoic, Mesozoic. Periods are where we're talking Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, etc. This is an older one because it's using quaternary. Epochs are where we split these into even smaller. So this is why I was saying for your activity, your participation, this time, I want you to tell me what you're doing. So are you doing the epochs of the Cenozoic? Are you doing all the periods? Tell me what your mnemonics for. So we're going to do the mnemonics, which is a way to remember these. So the wiki, the participation is going to be a wiki. So please create a mnemonic for geologic time and include what you're saying those represent. So here are some examples that I just screenshot. So for example, if you want to talk about the eras, doing Precambrian, Paleozoic, Mesozoic, Cenozoic, you could do the periods. This is the most common one probably, to do Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, Mississippian, Pennsylvanian, or Carboniferous. Those are the same. Tertiary and quaternary are older terms. Another reason why I need you to tell me that. So Cenozoic would be looking at the epochs. So again, just please tell me what you're using. So unconformities, a gap in the record. We don't have time, we're missing time. Sometimes we're missing significant amounts of time. And if we want absolute dating, that is where the only way we can get numerical ages for rocks and minerals. So quiz 4, due end of the day, Thursday. Quiz 5 will open on Thursday. Your midterm is going to be Thursday. It'll open at 2, and you have the rest of Thursday and then Friday to complete it. It is timed. Do not close your browser. If you have problems, email me. And if you email me at the last minute on Friday, I'm not going to get back to you right away. So I suggest you try to take it earlier rather than later in case you do have problems. There's not going to be class on Thursday so that you can take your exam. Again, for the midterm, it's going to stop right before fossils and plants. So it'll go through sedimentary rocks, but it's not going to talk about fossils and past life of the Earth. That's going to be on the next one. And then there are 2 participations this week. I am going to end my recording.